Starting with news from Israel, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that his government will move ahead with the reforms that aim to overhaul the country's judicial system. The Prime Minister announced the decision during a cabinet meet on Sunday. Since taking power, Netanyahu has made the legal changes the centerpiece of his government's agenda. The reforms introduced contain provisions that weaken the power of the country's Supreme Court. These include granting legislators the ability to pass legislation that the court has struck down, as well as give the government greater power over the appointment of judges and limit the independence of government legal advisers.
I am convinced that after the important and in-depth discussion in the Constitutional Committee, we will complete legislating the reforms in a way that will correct what needs correcting, will totally protect individual rights, and will restore the public's faith in the justice system that so much requires this reform.
Now, the proposed changes have sparked an outcry from Israel's top legal officials. The Supreme Court's top justice, in a rare criticism, called it an attack on the justice system. The country's Attorney General has also spoken out against the plan, as have many of the people who had previously held the position. Meanwhile, Israel's President Isaac Herzog warned on Sunday that the country faces a historic constitutional crisis due to these reforms. He also said that he was mediating between the relevant parties in this regard.
We are in the grips of a profound disagreement that is tearing our nation apart. This conflict worries me deeply, as it worries many across Israel and the diaspora.
The leader of the opposition, Yair Lapid, appeared poised to step up protests against the government. He reportedly met with chief of a labor organization in hopes of winning support from one of the nation's most powerful labor boss. Meanwhile, the state media reported that the coalition lawmakers will only make small cosmetic adjustments to the law. This comes a day after protests erupted across Israel against these reforms. There have been calls in the past to reform Israel's justice system, which was given greater clout in the 1990s. Critics see it as being too interventionist in the process of lawmaking. But the sweeping changes introduced have raised an alarm among the opposition. They see them as the death knell to Israel's system of checks and balances, and in turn its democratic fundamentals. While Netanyahu and his allies see the changes as a way to ease the process of governance and recalibrate what they say is an imbalance between the country's executive and judicial branches. For more on this, we're now being joined by our correspondent Jody Cohen from Ranana. Thank you so much for joining us, Jody. We've witnessed the opposition protest to these judicial reforms by Netanyahu government, which believe that this is discriminatory. There is also a view that Netanyahu is trying to bail himself out of the corruption cases with these pieces of legislation. What can you tell us?
Good morning. So yes, Netanyahu's legal troubles are considered to play a role in these proposed judicial reforms. The opposition are saying that they are being proposed in order to get him out of his legal worries, while the defense is suggesting that there's been a witch hunt against Netanyahu and that that's why judicial reform is needed. Now, there's a poll that's been released this morning from the Israel Democracy Institute, the IDI, which suggests that only 42% of people trust the High Court in Israel, which is the lowest approval rating since the IDI began collecting information. So that's definitely seen as a factor as well in these proposed judicial reforms. However, over the past decade, polls show that actually 55% of people here support the High Court's ability to strike down Knesset bills it opposes the principles of democracy. And the IDI is saying that that shows the majority don't want to weaken the judiciary. However, the government is saying that people knew what they were voting for in the election, that they wanted to reverse the judicial reforms from the 1990s, as you said, because many people feel that the courts took too much power back then and want to tilt the power back in favour of the parliament. The government is saying that the coalition won the election, that was the referendum on the judicial reforms, and that they need to fulfill the will of the people. Now, while many people agree that judicial reform is needed, many people feel very, very strongly that the proposals tilt too far in favour of the parliament.
Right. Now, President Herzog has intervened and he has pointed to a constitutional crisis if this face-off remains unresolved. What does that imply? By any chance, are we looking at yet another government collapse and election, or that's far-fetched right now?
I think that we're not looking at another election right now. President Herzog is trying to mediate. Government sources have suggested that they could make minor changes to some of the proposals, for example, reducing the number of government politicians on the Judicial Selections Committee. President Herzog, however, has said that significant gaps remain. The leader of the opposition, Yair Lapid, has been trying to get the unions involved in the protests. It's unclear at this stage whether or not they will join in. And we know that the Justice Ministry's Legal Counsel and Legislative Affairs Department is working on its response to the proposals, and they're expected to seek changes as well. And Parliament has got until March to debate these reforms. Netanyahu has said that individual rights won't be harmed. I was at the protest in Tel Aviv over the weekend with 80,000 people present protesting against the plans. They didn't appear to be convinced, and they're planning weekly protests.
Right. Well, Jody, thank you so much for joining us with all the updates on this. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.